on Ishq Vishq, Pyaar Vyaar, reading with a loving eye in the new India. We're excited. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction and for inviting me here, and thank you all for coming. This talk comes from my forthcoming book that was mentioned on what I call the Indian contemporary, which is both the recent present in India and also a new optic that I argue involves reading the present not primarily through the lens of capitalism or the right-wing turn, but as a heterogeneous time that might require new forms of analysis. The book argues that narratives of increasing religious fundamentalism and neoliberalism, which is how most people talk about the Indian present today, do not actually allow us to see the complexity of the various new texts that are being published and circulating in India today. Texts such as pulp fictions, reality television, and popular cinema, along with new kinds of novels, documentary films, and so on. Reading these new works as expressions of the demise of democracy, secularism, and cosmopolitanism can only tell us what we think we already know, that India has lost its counterculture, its literature of radical dissent, its slum's-eye view of politics, and its progressive mandate, and conclude that every aspect of life is being taken over by these new trends. By contrast, reading new works inductively for the worlds they imagine, even if those worlds don't subscribe to what we think of as aesthetically and politically radical, suggests that contemporary writers and cultural practitioners are using new tools and new media, including those made available by economic liberalization, in innovative ways to analyze India's present. Central to this project is a new relationship between critic and text that has generally been assumed in postcolonial literary criticism, one that highlights experiments and unfinished aims rather than exposes texts for what they exclude or for their lack of fully developed ideologies. Thus, I suggest an alternative to the somewhat repetitive nature of postcolonial literary criticism as it has been practiced over the past 2 decades, which subjects every new text to a similar prefabricated critique and assumes that reading is a self-evident practice rather than one generated at least in part from the text itself. It is important to remember that when Gayatri Spivak published her groundbreaking reading of Jane Eyre in 1985 and Edward Said his reading of Mansfield Park in 1993, they took the academic world by storm because they offered a new way to read older and oft-read texts. But 3 decades later, the reading practice that they advocated, exposing the silences of seemingly apolitical texts to reveal the epistemic violence underlying them, has ended up generating readings that ironically lack the same critical edge. As Rita Felsky argues of ideological critique more generally, what used to be radical against-the-grain readings have become ubiquitous and commonplace. Its gestures of demystification and exposure are no longer oppositional but obligatory. It singularly fails to surprise. Mitchum Hewells similarly writes that the left's capacity for political and social critique has run out of steam. Those argumentative descriptions of the world that aim to defamiliarize, disillusion, and debunk our commonly held beliefs, values, and norms, exposing their ideological or discursive construction, their aporias and contradictions, their constitutive blind spots, their racism or economic self-interest, those representational acts are not as effective as they used to be. In this paper, I develop a new possibility for reading born in intimacy rather than critical distance. I trace the work of contemporary filmmaker and cultural practitioner Paromita Vohra, whose 20-year career has seen her produce in a range of genres and media, and whose new work on love and sex in India constitutes trailblazing articulations of emergent sensibilities in ways that actively refuse the assumptions of the traditional left, mainstream feminism, and postcolonial theory. Moreover, her fluidity in moving inside and outside the text helps us understand the contemporary as a time in which the hierarchies between practitioner and critic are called into question, and in which writing, art, and criticism never remain fully external to the objects they represent. Vohra's work thus offers a way of rethinking not only recent literary and cultural production, but the very project of criticism itself. Rather than consider literary criticism as a distance methodology of analyzing texts from the outside, this chapter suggests that a literary criticism of the contemporary also has to become contemporary itself. Paromita Vohra began her career as a documentary filmmaker and has since worked in a range of media, authoring screenplays, a reality television show, a comic book, 2 newspaper columns, and a multimedia web platform. Like many other authors and practitioners I discuss in the book, Vohra locates her experimental work as having emerged in India's post-liberalization era, which, besides inaugurating a consumer-oriented economy, marked a shift in the world of organization-left politics, during which feminists broke away from Marxist groups, Dalit feminists challenged the feminist movement on its non-reflexivity vis-a-vis caste or religion, and sexuality movements challenged other movements on account of heteronormativity and prudery. As Vohra recounts, this breakdown of unitary leftist politics gave new impetus to documentary filmmakers previously restricted by a narrow definition of political filmmaking. Vohra thus finds an opening in what much commentary is conceived of as a lamentable fragmentation of the left, and as the decline of art and culture through their commercialization. Her perspective claims that while some possibilities have been closed down in the new India, others have been opened up, compelling us to do away with a unitary definition of political progressivism rooted in fixed characters like the worker, the woman, or the outcast, and instead think through the nature of the political and art and culture's continuing relationship to it. Vohra's documentary films have insistently rejected the dominant style of political documentary, with its sobriety, authoritative aesthetic, and inherently oppositional stance. Vohra's films are playful and experimental, using formal innovations such as fiction interspersed with documentary, animation, faux advertisements, and personal cameos. These innovations constitute a deliberate move away from the film's division documentary tradition, in which documentary was invested in a certain political bottom line and displayed what she calls, quote, a strongly objectivist tendency, uncomfortable with intuitive observation and ambiguous responses, end quote. And if you've ever seen a documentary, you know what I'm talking about. As Anuja Jain writes, the original mandate of the film's division, established after independence, gave documentary, quote, a utilitarian purpose, that of propaganda for the new nation, with its concomitant aesthetics of a didactic, non-story, non-dialogue, voice of God narrative, end quote. This was strengthened in the 1970s and 1980s when Harden became the leading figure in activist documentary filmmaking. But Harden's films condemning issues such as Hindu nationalism, militarism, and corporate interests are notable for eschewing aesthetics, thus marking a space of the political which had, quote, little commitment to what he terms superfluous formal elements. Vohra worked as an assistant on Patwardhan's set for 3 years at the start of her career, and her own vision of documentary grew very much out of the limitations of his. This is apparent in Unlimited Girls, Vohra's first feature-length documentary from 2002. Rather than advance a feminist agenda by, for instance, exposing patriarchal social structures or having poor women speak to power on screen, Unlimited Girls is structured as a question. What does it mean to be a feminist? The film begins with the uncertain musings of its fictionalized narrator, Fearless, named after the popular 1940s Bollywood star known as Fearless Nadia, played by Vohra herself. Fearless logs on to a chat room in which various women are discussing what they understand feminism to be. These discussions pique Fearless's interest, leading her to learn more about the history of Indian feminism by interviewing young people as well as established feminists. She talks with anti-dowry activists, Mumbai's first female taxi driver, and men and women of various ages. She comes at feminism from the position of questioning. How the history of feminism matters in the present, whether labels such as feminist might limit women's freedom, what role sex and pleasure play in feminism, and whether feminism is primarily a negation of patriarchy or a positive imaginary for a better world. Never extracting a moral or even a common thread, Unlimited Girls is a film she has called untidy with both doubt and certitude, moody with questions. By broaching these questions through the fictionalized space of the chat room, Vohra foregrounds the idea of feminism as emerging in conversations and within, not despite, new media. The chat room scenes are supplemented by other conversations among men and women in classrooms, in public fora, in outside and public space, conversations that are full of questions and disagreements. The sensibility here is one of multiple voices constituting multiple feminisms born in dialogue and exchange, rather than a fixed political movement that one can either subscribe to or reject. This is a feminism beyond the pale, one that is unlimited. In a chat room conversation about sexual harassment, Fearless asks, "Can we just talk about the girls who want to say yes?" and is met with surprise from the other participants. "I don't mean yes to sexual harassment," Fearless hastily explains. "Whenever we talk about sex and women, it's about rape, assault. If we only teach women to fear sex, then how are we supposed to feel good and free about it?" One responder with the screen name Marxist Usha writes back, "It's okay for Western women to talk about sexual liberation. In our country, there are so many other problems to solve." And Fearless resorts sarcastically, yeah, no sex please, we're Indian." Unlimited thus becomes the film's utopic wish, a feminism that always exceeds its prescribed limits, even those prescribed by feminists themselves. As Fearless asks at the end, quote, "Do you think feminism is something we pointed to and chose, or was it something that grew a little more each time our minds were not closed and our hearts were open?" In the last several years, Vohra has supplemented these experiments in documentary film with explorations in a range of other media. As she said in an interview, "I don't see myself as wearing very many hats. It's not different professions for me. It's all born out of an interest in the same set of themes and wanting to talk about different aspects of certain things in the world. Some things work better in film, some in writing. I use whatever form is available to me." This movement across forms allows her to continue her interest in discovering how the political process exists in everything at all moments, rather than politics as defined and dispensed through an example of an event or a process. Thus, in her weekly newspaper column in the Midday newspaper and her 64-episode reality television show, Connected Hum Tum, both of which experiment with representation along a regularized rhythm, Vohra represents the political possibilities embedded in everyday life. Since 2010, Vohra has written a 500-word weekly column for the daily newspaper Midday titled Paranormal Activity. By the end of 2018, so this is a weekly column that started in 2010, it's ongoing. So by the end of 2018, she had published more than 400 columns, and it is still ongoing. In her 5-year reflection on the project in an April 2015 column, Vohra admits that at first she had been worried that she would not have enough to write about every week. But that ended up being far from the case. "I no longer wonder what to write about. I developed the opposite problem of wanting to write about too many things each week." Vohra thus presents the formal expansiveness of the weekly column as generating content that is seemingly infinite, rather than, as might be expected, progressively diminishing. Content is birthed here by form. Indeed, in these columns, Vohra has written about a vast range of topics. She has discussed issues of immediate political relevance, such as the passage of the sexual assault bill in 2013, the continuing prevalence of dowry deaths, and the various bans instituted by the government and right-wing groups. She reports on films she has seen or television shows that have caught her eye. She offers her thoughts on holidays like Diwali and Women's Day. Sometimes she merely describes something without revealing her opinion on it, such as a 2014 column on the newly modernized Mumbai airport, and a 2015 one on the cultural politics of the Shalwar Kameez. At other times, her viewpoint is clear, as in her 2016 column on the sexist rules for dress and behavior in girls' college hostels, and her 2015 criticism of the lynching of Muhammad Iqbal for the alleged crime of eating beef. The themes of love and sex are increasingly evident, as in her defense of pornography after the government's 2015 ban, and her repeated criticism of feminists who police other women for not being feminist enough. There are also topics seemingly unconnected to current events, such as personal experiences with friends or relatives, and a 2016 column on a Google crowdsource to find a dessert that starts with the letter N for its Android updates. Vohra suggested Nayapam, but nougat was chosen. Across these various topics, in their very range, the columns refuse a predetermined sense of what it means to be a progressive or feminist critic, and indeed what it means to be a critic at all. In their variety, Vohra seems to ask, how does a critic choose what is important? What is relevant and what is mundane? What issues count as crucial questions of our time? The regularized rhythm of newspaper writing offers what Alex Wallach calls, in the context of George Orwell's weekly column, As I Please, an underlying temporality of disposability, transience, and contemporaneity, which is in stark contrast to the more spectacular forms of the novel, the feature film, or the academic monograph. Yet this sense of daily experience is always verging on the infinite, the unfinished, on, as Vohra put it, too many things. The tension between the transient and the infinite offers a new relationship between world and text. The heterogeneous topics promised by the weekly column refuse predetermined understandings of relevance, and the columns as a whole go further to present knowledge, whether feminist insight or reflections on pleasure, as inseparable from the multiplicity of daily life. Relevance is grounded in the heterogeneity of the world. We see a similar experiment with representation, politics, and everyday time in the Hindi reality television series Connected Hum Tum, which Vohra directed for Zee TV and which aired over 3 months in 2013. For the show, 6 women were given handheld cameras and trained them to record their lives over 6 months. Although the show was edited and the participants were advised on how to effectively film their lives, the aesthetic remains highly episodic, even naturalistic, refusing a tight plot or narrative drama and interspersing moments in the 6 lives without overdetermining their meaning. Hosted by film star Abhay Deol, who opens and closes each episode and sometimes offers commentary, the show enters into the lives of the 6 women on what is presented as their own terms in a sprawling set of episodic narratives shown in 64 20-minute episodes. The women, Preeti, Pallavi, Mahima, Sonal, Malishka, and Preeti is married and has a young son. She tries to balance her career as a dentist, her love of dancing, and her family life, including a husband who is oblivious to her needs and a mother who is emotionally distant. Pallavi works in retail and is just married for the 2nd time. Even though her husband means well, she struggles to prove to him that she can work and look after their home. Mahima has come to Mumbai from Meerut to try her luck in films, leaving behind a disappointed family. Sonal is a young gay woman whose partner, Janu, has to muster up the courage to come out to her parents. Malishka is a successful radio DJ debating whether she ever wants to get married, and Madhavi used to be a theater actor, has been divorced for 20 years, and is growing accustomed to living alone, even when her ex-husband gives her hints that he wants to get back together. As you can see, the show's choice of these 6 women refuses a sociological approach that might instead choose 6 types to represent the diversity of India. The show eschews big themes like class, caste, and religion. Rather, there are small, mundane conflicts. Madhavi's ex-husband returns, Malishka breaks up with her boyfriend, and Pallavi decides to quit her job. But these events are not the show's focus. Rather, they serve as a scaffolding on which the real matters of everyday life play out. Each episode, there are 64 episodes, each episode has a unifying title and features 3 of the women whose lives loosely relate to it. Some themes are topical, like marriage or the family. In episode 11, for instance, Ghar walon ke khatir, or For the Sake of the Family, Preeti struggles to reconcile her love of belly dancing with her husband's insistence that she focus more on her dental career. Mahima is thinking of marrying her boyfriend, Gaurav, but her parents think he lacks the status to be her husband. And Sonal worries that when her girlfriend goes home for a family wedding, she will not tell her parents about their relationship and instead will be pressured into getting engaged. This episode presents family obligations as a problem for all 3 women, but in different ways. There are also a few episodes that cover more legible feminist issues, such as episode 12, Azadi, or Freedom, in which Malishka, Madhavi, and Pallavi reflect on what it means to be free. Pallavi is hounded by her husband, who criticizes her for dressing inappropriately when she goes out, even though she insists she likes looking nice. Malishka learns how to do more things for herself at home, so she is less reliant on her mother. Madhavi, who now lives alone, reflects on freedom in positive ways. Episode 16, Bahu Betiya, focuses on relations with parents and in-laws as they are affected by gender. And episode 46, Working Ladies Ki Prem Kahani, focuses on the struggles working women undergo to find and manage romantic relationships. But these are largely exceptions. By far, most episodes are structured around an affect or attitude rather than an explicit topic or political issue, reflecting the show's investment in excavating the contours of women's everyday lives. Thus, we have episodes on loneliness, things taking a turn for the worse, traveling, thinking the grass is always greener, longing, dashed dreams, healing old wounds, new beginnings, trying, anger, doing things for the first time, feeling trapped, new intentions, and making decisions. As you can see, these episodes give form to ephemeral emotions and sensibilities rather than legible feminist issues. In episode 14, Tayari, which means getting ready, Madhavi begins to plan for her pregnant daughter's visit, Preeti's son practices for his annual sports day at school, Sonal waits for Janu to come home from her parents' house, and Pallavi plans a birthday party for her father-in-law. This episode is particularly interesting because Tayari marks a time of waiting and anticipation rather than a time of an event itself. By organizing an episode entirely around this liminal time, Vohra illuminates the unremarkable temporalities that structure daily experience. These interests in love, desire, and everyday feminism have coalesced in the last several years in a number of experiments with representing love. One of these is a weekly column in Mumbai Mirror, another daily newspaper in Mumbai, called How to Find Indian Love, in which she explores questions of sex and desire in India outside of simplistic narratives that would say that any discussion of sexuality in India is clearly being influenced by the West. As in her films, throughout the columns, we see a resistance to seeing love merely as a sociological phenomenon. She wants love to guide thought rather than be subsumed into a theoretical paradigm determined in advance. For example, in her columns on the use of dating apps such as Tinder, which opened to the Indian market in 2013, she shows that there is no one-to-one connection between these new apps and new forms of love. And she pointedly refuses the commodification narrative that is so often used to explain the post-liberalization present. People use dating apps in multiple ways. Some do it to kill time at traffic lights, others to make friends, a few even to network. Some are looking for love, some for an unending series of mini affairs, extramarital or regular, some for validation, some for someone with enough shoes to orgasm into, and others for they don't know quite what. The heterogeneity of sexual practices is the formal impetus for Vohra's own formal heterogeneity. She looks at these different desires with what she calls a non-moralistic, loving eye. This mode of engagement is explicitly different from analysis. Perhaps it is only colonizers, she says, who love anthropological catalogs, and corporates who love Excel sheets, who expect this heterogeneity to be otherwise. They prefer subjects and consumers to behave in homogeneous and hence controllable ways. The world of sex and desire is radical precisely because it defies this, pulses with a polyphony and libidinal caprice, upends categories and alters norms. Taking on these themes in yet another medium, in 2016, Vohra's production company Paradevi Pictures launched a multimedia web project called Agents of Ishq, which means Agents of Love. The website makes use of striking, colorful visuals and offers fiction, music, quizzes, poems, and news stories with the intention, in the words of the website, to give sex a good name. As she did in Unlimited Girls, Vohra questions the way sex is always associated with violence against women, which is only intensified in the wake of the infamous Nearby rape case in 2012. Thus, giving sex a good name is an attempt to begin a conversation on love and sex that offers a proliferation of positive stories about sexuality, not only ones that elicit fear and highlight risk. There's an educational element to Agents of Ishq containing quizzes such as, are you a genital genius? How much do you know about male genital organs? And articles on sexual hygiene and what is a normal period. But the layout and overall playful design suggest that sex education cannot be seen apart from the worlds of pleasure and desire. Education means not only warnings about sexual health, but also an expansion of the very vocabulary in which we talk about sex. This is central to the Agents of Ishq project, underlining the idea of representation as a generative process rather than only reflective existing realities. Features on the website such as Is Pyaar ko main kya naam doon, words people use for masturbation, and the results of a penis survey that recorded things that people call their penis include an assortment of terms in Hindi, English, and other Indian languages as an attempt to collect the wide vocabulary that people have in India to talk about practices that are not much discussed in the public domain, to give a representational thickness to these practices, both to legitimize them and to record the rich vernacular vocabulary already existing around them. Agents of Ishq likewise constructed a kiss map in which the word for kiss in different Indian languages is represented visually. The masturbation, penis, and kiss vocabularies register an active attempt to collect, record, and indeed inspire a new vernacular of sex that emphasizes creativity and refuses the Indian tradition Western influence binary. The orientation here is toward organic exploration and lack of judgment rather than the use of categories or already established labels. The web interface is an ideal medium for representing this new expanding vocabulary for sex and sexuality, as it is never singular or fixed, but is continually shaped by new perspectives, stories, languages, and terminologies. In addition to content added by Vohra and her team, the site hosts fora such as a Sexy Saturday playlist, curated by different contributors, and poems, illustrations, and stories by different authors and artists. Content changes regularly, so each time a user opens a site, she experiences a different set of stories and images. There's a multifariousness to this kind of representation of sexuality that plays a legitimizing function, steering deliberately clear of any moralizing or normativizing, and offering multiplicity as the form of sexuality more broadly. It offers a utopic forum where people are free to talk about their sexuality, and also a utopic instantiation of formal openness itself. Crossing the significant divide between sex education and erotica, Agents of Ishq presents a vernacular erotics that illuminates a set of contemporary issues around masculinity, sexuality, women's desire, and pleasure, while never resorting to a sociological stance that remains outside the issues it unearths. The multifarious website constitutes a new kind of textuality, one that does not merely describe pleasure, but elicits it as well. Through its formal excess, it refuses the dry sociological textuality that Roland Barthes finds in the, quote, prattling text, the frigid text, in which the reader is positioned resolutely outside rather than as a potential object of seduction. In Agents of Ishq, the reader is constantly invited in to partake in the pleasures the text offers, a creative practice that is at the heart of Vohra's sociology of the contemporary, which is a contemporary sociology, born of pleasure and shorn of the distance that constitutes conventional criticism. This refusal of frigid criticism extends to Vohra's reflections on Hindi cinema. Bollywood is, for Vohra, another vernacular form that is a key yet largely unacknowledged source of pleasure and desire in contemporary India. Although Bollywood films are criticized by intellectuals and progressives for their melodramatic and populist politics and their heightened emotional and romantic register, it is precisely for its fervent faith in love and its embrace of formal excess that Vohra finds Bollywood so rich as a source of vernacular theorizations of desire. She is critical about many things about the industry, including its insider culture, its sexism, and its self-hype. But she still finds it a promising alternative not only to a rational civil society, but also to a frigid criticism. Thus, her writings offer a very different perspective on contemporary popular film than most critics. For instance, one recent trend has been for critics to praise films that move away from Bollywood conventions and are more realist and downplayed in their aesthetics and storytelling. The general sense is that these more realist films are broadening Hindi cinema and moving it away from its tried and true formulas. However, Vohra is largely critical of this trend. For instance, the 2015 film Dum Laga Ke Haisha is about a couple brought together by an arranged marriage. The woman is overweight, and the man first thinks he cannot love her for that reason, but eventually does. This is the kind of story praised for critics for representing love more realistically than conventional Bollywood, and also for including stories of non-normative body types rather than an idealized female figure. Vohra is on board with these two features. However, she also criticized the movie for seeming to promise something unconventional, but providing a peculiarly defeated answer to the question of what is love. Even when making a case for the couple's romance, she writes, the film provides not even one image, leave alone scene, of these two people, which is sensual, sexy, romantic, lush, joyful, tender, intimate, fun, or beautiful. The film is politically committed to representing their non-normative relationship, but in taking such a strong political stance, ends up taking all the sensuality out of its representation. This isn't just a failure of cinematic imagination, she writes, it's a lack of belief in love and sex as strong transformative forces in our lives. In contrast, Vohra is full of praise for the 2017 film Anandali of Ada, the story of an erotic dancer in Bihar who takes revenge on a government official who sexually assaulted her. This is also a more realistic representation than what is conventionally found in Bollywood, but what Vohra likes about it is that despite being realistic, it does not disavow Bollywood's seductive quality, evident in the protagonist's raunchy songs, her blingy, cold-shoulder chemises, her full-lipped, curvy-hipped presence, her friends with benefits relationship with her manager, the fact that his wife runs off with the milkman. All of it is an evocation and affirmation of the naturalness of erotic life, seeing sex not as an exception, but as a part of life and Indian culture in myriad big and small ways. Even though the story includes sexual assault, it does not take a prudish tone, but offers female desire as legitimate, even in a world marked by the possibility of violence. This cultivation of pleasure is, for Vohra, even more important than the politics of the plot. It is the former that compels her as a critic and a fan. I think I cried after seeing it, because as a woman, if I express dissatisfaction or critique of a so-called woman's issue film, I am made to feel churlish and demanding by acquaintances, friends, and strangers. Are, at least it did this, people will say. I think I cried because I realized somewhere I had begun to believe that this was my lot in movies, life, and love. This gun-juice, male appeasement version of consent, not a full-bodied, full-blooded celebration of pleasure and consent. Anarkali is preoccupied not with sexual trauma, but living a life she loves. I cried with relief that I didn't have to be cravenly grateful for a patriarch pinkly saying no means no, though sure, it's good. At the end, as a woman who loves art and red lipstick and romance, as a woman who loves to live, I wanted to stand up and say yes, yes, a million times on my own terms, yes. That's also what we mean when we say consent. Here we have the expression of the critic's emotional investment and desire in the film she is watching, which infuses the critical text, the most frigid of genres, with its own erotics. This passage is not just a description of Vohra's emotional response to the film, it is her emotional response, complete with the climactic interjections of yes, yes. We have a doubling here, whereby the moment when the film invites the viewer inside its world of desire, a moment that never occurs in Dam Laga Ke Haisha, becomes the very moment the critic invites her reader inside her world of desire, rupturing the standard distances between film and its audience and criticism and its audience. For Vohra, this is what it means to be both fan and critic. Nowhere is this clearer than in her expressed fandom of Bollywood superstar Shah Rukh Khan, known for his romantic roles and also derided by many critics and intellectuals for his formulaic and cheesy on-screen persona, unlike, for instance, the more serious demeanor of Aamir Khan, a star whom Vohra has deemed elsewhere appealing only if you're vegan. But it is precisely for his character's belief in love that Vohra prefers Shah Rukh Khan. For a new generation of Indians, SRK gave us someone to love our way, someone to long for, someone to conceivably be. The moral compass SRK provided was love. This was not simply romantic love, but a concept that develops individual ethical frameworks, allowing us to look at the opposition with loving eyes, that takes others into consideration. The characters Shah Rukh Khan played find their better selves through love, using it to find new resolutions and solutions. In this kind of masculinity, she continues, there is room for women beyond being objectified or uplifted by men. In this universe, a woman with ambitions is not weird, selfish, or unfeminine, but natural and desirable. She is not domesticated by marriage, but partnered through fun and sexual passion. With this fantasy of a passionate yet light romance, Shah Rukh Khan has pleasured and ruined a generation of women while making them open to a whole other kind of man. Shah Rukh Khan is like a catalyzing rasa that exists in the world that makes you feel sexy. He is the mechanism that turns you on, not necessarily for him, for you to experience desire. How many things in this fucking world are made for women to experience desire? You tell me, you can count them on one hand. Several scholars and journalists have written about fandom in Indian cinema, but I hope you can see that what distinguishes Vohra's approach is how she writes herself simultaneously as fan, rather than as distant sociologist of fandom in general. This is again apparent in an article on the Pakistani-born Bollywood star Fawad Khan. According to her, Fawad Khan has many of the same qualities as Shah Rukh. He is comfortable sharing space with women characters. He seems comfortable being a character rather than replaying an archetype, which makes him feel accessible, touchable, real. But it's not just that. He's hot. He's hot with those soft brown eyes and spiky eyelashes and slow smile. You might almost never notice his hotness until you suddenly do, and then you notice little else. His eyes have both mystery and mischief and many other things you could spend a while observing. His manner is composed, controlled, as if he keeps his own counsel and is in no hurry to decide anything or show you what he's all about. Like he's in no hurry for you to decide and is totally secure giving you some space. His delicate beauty lends vulnerability, and at the same time, he seems absolutely together, able to take care of himself, not asking you to be his mother or like his mother, not blaming you for his broken heart, not trying too hard to impress. In other words, he seems grown up. Most writings on Fuad Khan focus on the fact that he's a Pakistani actor in the Indian film industry and thus represents headway in overcoming the two nations' enmity, despite a 2016 politically motivated ban on Pakistani artists working in India. But for Vohra, this is the least interesting fact about him. Rejecting any cultural studies, costume, and aman kiasha accessories, Vohra refuses preconceived ideas of both progressive politics and cultural analysis, clearing the way for a new kind of engagement with contemporary culture outside. For Vohra, political righteousness does not translate into the ability to represent love or desire. In fact, as in Dam Laga Ke Haisha, it might actually impede it. Here too, the question of India-Pakistan peace is discarded for a more libidinal engagement across a different kind of border. What does it mean to be both practitioner and critic, lover and writer? What borders are transgressed in this practice? These questions underlie Vohra's oeuvre, which represents the world and is always on the verge of representing representation itself. Vohra is interested in the space where artist meets critic, where the two overlap and intersect, generating new relations and potentially new forms of critical art. Her criticism is born from the world and refuses an authoritative stance over it. In the 2014 column, she writes that most ideas of political change come from an imagination in which we are outside the world, looking on it from above, in a position to change it. The inescapable truth, though, is that we are part of this world, living and creating energies, words, and thoughts that generate change. In Vohra's recent essay on Chetan Bhagat's novel Half-Girlfriend, we see the stakes of this approach on literary criticism as well. Unlike most critics, she does not set out to excoriate Bhagat, but reads his novel with a loving eye, even if she is generally critical of him. She reads him in a way as a fellow writer. There are things she likes about the novel, such as its title that seems to gesture to those might-have-beens, those ambivalent, ambiguous, hesitant relationships that are there yet not quite there. She likes the first part of the story with its experience of uncertain love. But she feels Bhagat cannot follow through on these precarious sensibilities. Rather, the book ends up subscribing to rigid distinctions between men and women, urban and rural, English and Pasha. The novel teaches rather than engages. There is no ambiguity. But her approach to reading is open and unfinished, even for a text like Bhagat's. Regarding her own process in writing on Half-Girlfriend, she reflects, I started writing a diary of reading the book as I was reading it. I could see that Half-Girlfriend's written like a very dull 3-act structure that everyone adheres to, the orthodoxy of commercial script writing. I also wrote my diary in 3 acts. So it became, in a sense, a dance with Chetan Bhagat's book, and I thought that was important to do because, you know, whatever my critique of it should happen on the terms of that work. There is no point critiquing something because that thing is not like you. What's the point of that, right? Vohra has spoken about her films in similar terms. As I see it, my film is an invitation to dance. I lead and ask my audience to join me by following the rhythm I suggest. However, there is no foregone conclusion to this dance. Once again, Vohra's works consider criticism also as a creative practice. The dance she describes offers a radically new imagination of engagement between critic and object of study that implies partnership and even desire, the intensity of two bodies joined in embrace. The dance does not have to come from perfect harmony with the object, as it is clear she does not necessarily like Half-Girlfriend, but it does have to remain open to the possibility of love. What kind of criticism might emerge from this image of dance and the possibility of love? It is not solely a question for the Indian contemporary, but also for literary criticism itself. What relations between text and critic are possible in our current state of critical culture? What energies attract us to our subjects, other than the ones of a potentially frigid critical theory? What bonds tie us to the worlds we study? Are we just analyzing those worlds from the outside, or do we also live in them? Can our criticism be more than just negative? Can it involve the creation of new images, the imagining of new worlds? Vohra's constant probing of the luminous insides of the objects of her study offers a new model for reading contemporary India. Rather than criticize the representation of women as heroines or vamps, or the prudishness around sexuality from a position outside those representations, Vohra has spent her 2-decade-long career actually offering alternatives, using her art to participate in the collective effort of creative world making. What does it mean to critique, and what does it mean to practice, and why have we placed the two on opposing ends of our conceptual imaginaries? As Vohra said in an interview, I feel it is the job of an artist to recognize the rhythms around her, put them into a pattern, and make meaning out of it. This is not an art or a criticism that transcends the world, but one that is in and of the world. Thus, it will continually transform itself as the world around us changes, and will remain perennially unfinished, calling on us to write and analyze, but also to rewrite and reanalyze as part of practicing criticism itself as a process. Indeed, the less we remain at a critical distance from our texts, and the less we assume an antagonistic relationship to them, the more we recognize ourselves as constitutive parts of the textual world we are writing about, further blurring the divide between the inside and the outside. Although this may diminish the stature of the critic, it might paradoxically herald the rebirth of literary criticism in the 21st century. Thank you.
We have time for a discussion, questions?